Back in 1975, a young Canadian made his first feature-length movie. It was called Shivers. And well, it really scared the hell out of everybody. It was so dark, so perverse, that its artistic merit was even debated in Parliament. It was also the most profitable Canadian film up to that point. So now flash forward 35 years or so, and Cronenberg is still making movies that push boundaries. They explore darkness, and sometimes, yes, they make you squirm. But he didn't always have his heart set on film. He was actually headed toward a life in the sciences, just like his idol Isaac Asimov. But when he won a literary award in his freshman year at University of Toronto, David Cronenberg switched gears entirely. He started telling stories. And while his early films featured things that might repulse you, like violent parasites and exploding heads, nice. They're actually films about ideas. Films that delved deep into the psychology of complex characters.
Tell me the truth. What are you?
Over the years, his films have become, for the most part, less bloody. Like his latest, it's called A Dangerous Method, and it explores the turbulent and really interesting relationship between Sigmund Freud and his pseudo-student Carl Jung.
You realize this makes you undisputed crown prince, don't you?
David Cronenberg!
Good to see you. Good to see you. The genesis of this story is so interesting to me, the idea of a box of letters that are found, essentially.
Sure. Actually, it was a suitcase, an old leather suitcase that was left in some dank room in the University of Geneva.
What a discovery to kind of go, hey, oh my God, this is Jung and
That's
Freud.
Right, yeah. Very exciting, really.
How did it get to you, the story?
Well, I didn't know anything about it until I read the play by Christopher Hampton, which was called The Talking Cure, and it was about the relationship amongst Sabine Spielrein, this woman whose existence almost wasn't known at all, and Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, who of course were very well known.
The character arcs are endless in a sense, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it was an incredibly rich era, very passionate, well-educated, articulate, incredibly deeply cultured people, but who felt that they were discovering an atomic bomb, really. They were discovering something that was earth-shaking about human nature, about the way the human mind worked. And in fact, Freud was considered quite a dangerous person at the time because it was an era of great stability, the feeling that mankind was progressing from being animal to being angel. You know, there was progress, there was rationality, everything could be worked out by intellect and so on. And Freud was saying, no, there are hugely destructive forces underneath the human psyche. And they can erupt and they can cause incredible violence and barbarity and tribal craziness and chaos. And of course, the First World War proved that everything he said was right. But at the time, it was not something people wanted to hear.
When you read the play, saw the play, did you think this is the film, or how did that get to be a movie for you?
I did, actually. I thought, I wasn't reading it thinking, I'm looking for a movie. But when I read it, I thought, I must have always wanted to do a movie that involved Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis. And to say I want to do a movie about Freud doesn't give you anything because he had a long life. I mean, where's the dramatic structure, you know? Do you see him sitting in a room thinking? What do? But suddenly here was this amazing, what I think of as an intellectual ménage à trois, sort of love triangle, because there was love between Freud and Jung, you know. It was a bromance, you know. But it was
early bromance.
A very intellectual one. But, and really it was the introduction of Sabine into their lives that made it be a dramatic structure. And that was fantastic, and it was a real revelation to read that play.
Speaking of burgeoning bromances, I mean, this is a third now for you and Viggo.
Yeah, that is a bromance,
yeah.
I must confess. I confess it now.
But Viggo wasn't supposed to be the guy in this film, so...
Yes. Well, it's not unusual, I must say, to have people, actors commit to your movie and then drop out because sometimes they just get a better offer in terms of money or whatever. But sometimes, because it takes so long for an independent film to get put together, you might be talking to somebody about the movie 2 years ago, and now they've kind of lost interest in it.
So the two characters, so Viggo and Fassbender, were they both, who were the original cast members? I heard that you were talking to Christian Bale at one point about
That's right.
the Fassbender.
I talked to Christian Bale about playing Carl Jung, which is the role that Michael Fassbender had. I was talking to Christoph Waltz about playing Sigmund Freud.
He's the Academy Award winner, of course, from *Inglourious Basterds*. Yeah.
Yes, and Christoph is from Vienna. He's Viennese. He pursued me, actually. He wanted to play the role. He told me about his grandfather, who had actually been a pupil of Sigmund Freud's, and so on and so on. And so it was a bit of a shock when he dropped out, because he suddenly wanted to do Water for Elephants.
How far into the...
That was very close to when we were shooting. Now, Christian Bale, well, I like to say Christian Bale bailed and Christoph Waltz waltzed, you know.
But somehow I think the waltz pissed you off more than the bail.
Well, it did because we were closer to shooting, and the way independent films are financed, you know, Christoph is a big name in the German-speaking world once he won his Oscar for *Inglourious Basterds*. And a lot of the financing was built around him.
Yeah.
And so when he left, that really was quite a blow, and could have brought the movie down, I must say. And I phoned, well, actually emailed Viggo, and I said, you know, Viggo, think about Sigmund Freud. You know, let me send you this script. And I had initially approached Viggo about being in the movie, and he didn't really see himself playing that role. Once we started to, first of all, he knew he was helping us out, because we were in trouble. And the second thing is that once we started to think about who Sigmund Freud really was, because we all know the old, aged, cancer-ridden Sigmund Freud, the grandfatherly guy with the beard. But in the movie, he's 50, and he's at the height of his powers, and he's a leader of a very dynamic but sort of revolutionary psychoanalytic movement. And he was described in the literature of the times as being handsome, masculine, charismatic, seductive. And I'm thinking, that's Viggo, you know? Why could he not play that role? And this is delivering a Sigmund Freud that I think is actually more accurate in terms of what he was at that time in his life than the sort of traditional kind of old guy that you cast for Freud.
Just on a human level, too, that's a real show of friendship between you and him, Viggo.
Well, it is. It's a friendship that's also a professional relationship, but we do love each other. We do get along incredibly well. We have a lot of fun on the set, and there's a lot of trust between us. I mean, in order to do a scene like the sauna scene in Eastern Promises, there has to be a lot of trust between an actor and a director to do a scene like that.
What about I'll come back to this, but what about all the talk about an Eastern Promises sequel? Are you open to that?
We are. It's being written by Steve Knight, who wrote the original, and we are interested in doing it. I mean, it's the first movie that I've done that I've ever thought I might be interested in doing a sequel for, because that character of Nikolai that Viggo played in that movie I wasn't finished with him yet. I mean, he's Russian, but we never see him in Russia, and I was thinking I want to go back to Russia with him and see where he came from. So that's unfinished business, let's say, with that character.
Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Yes.
It was yours to take, right? Because the last time you were here, we talked about...
That's interesting.
We talked about Top Gun, Interview with the Vampire, and movies that you had turned down, you had the opportunity to make.
That's true.
From what I read, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was offered to you. Is that true?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, it was an open assignment. You know, it had not been... They wanted to do a remake of it. It was a Swedish film, a very successful Swedish film. And it was sort of, I think my agent sort of said, you know, are you interested in this? Because if you are, we'll pursue it. I think if David Fincher had expressed interest at the time, he would have gotten it instead of me anyway, because his track record in terms of, you know, box office is much greater than mine. So I don't think I would have gotten it over David Fincher. That's just the way it goes. But it was not something I wanted to do. I mean, it was such a recent movie that, as I say, was very successful all over the world, except in maybe North America. To do a remake of it, to me, would be very strange.
Could you connect with the subject matter? Because it's, as you know, hugely popular.
Yeah, it's hugely popular. It had a really weird tone to it. That was, I mean, every man in the movie is a misogynist or a rapist, literally. And I thought, this is stacking the deck a little too much. You know, I mean, it's one thing to talk about misogyny in society and so on, but it got to the point where I must say I thought it was almost comical. I mean, every man you met, you knew eventually was going to try and rape the lead girl character.
There was only one person, one male, it wasn't it, right?
Only one male, and he's kind of like asexual in a weird way, you know, so it's like kind of, it had a very weird tone to it that I didn't actually relate to directly, so I wasn't going to direct it.
Our relationship with sexuality has changed much over that, you know, the 100 years or plus since people have been talking about it in the modern era, and It's still, when done properly, plays a big role in films.
Yes.
Is it something that still interests you?
Well, obviously, in A Dangerous Method, it's you've got people who maybe talk about sex more than they do sex, you know, but it was Freud's insistence that sexuality was a hugely important motor of the unconscious, and that was considered quite revolutionary and scary, you know, to think that that sexuality was even in polite society was driving what many people did. And I think it's still definitely true. I mean, there's no question about it.
It doesn't matter how many layers of society we add onto it, we're still animals in some respect, right?
We have to accept that. I mean, and you can see constantly with the outbreak of tribal wars that descend to incredible viciousness, and also the use of rape as a political weapon, which we see a lot in Africa in particular. Freud would not be surprised. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Is there a theme somewhere down there that you're at this age now, with this experience, you might be ready to really explore?
I think the sex of old people might be a good one. How about that?
Yeah, no, that's what sexuality of anybody is interesting, especially when you don't think about it.
Yes.
Yes.
Now that I'm an old person. You know.
Stick around, more with David Cronenberg when we come back.
The reason that young people are more interested in horror films is because they haven't in their own lives experienced the kinds of things that you experience when you get older that really are the metaphorical equivalents of what you get in a horror film. I mean, the aging and the death of your parents, of your friends, associates committing suicide. There are a lot of bad things that happen to people as they get older.
Back to David Cronenberg. That was some time ago.
That was some time ago. I could live without those glasses, but I was pretty cute. You know?
Right, yeah.
What can I say?
What would you tell that kid if you could go back and talk to him?
I would tell him he's absolutely right about what happens when you get older. I'm here now.
How does your atheism influence your work?
Atheism?
Yeah.
Totally. You know, I mean, I really don't deal with God very much in my movies because it's just not in my life, frankly. And when there's a character who is sort of very religious and so on, I do have to displace myself to really inhabit that world because it's not natural to me.
If you were given a $150 million budget and a mandate of doing another biopic, who would it be?
Well, that's interesting. Well, I think Einstein, but I would take 50 of it for myself and do a very simple movie about Einstein before he was famous, because he was a customs official in Switzerland. So you could do Einstein in a room and give me the 50 million.
Directing movies as long as you have, is it difficult for you to sit down and just watch a movie?
No, it's not. It's difficult for me to sit down and watch one of my own movies, though. It's kind of impossible, actually.
Which ones makes you the most uncomfortable?
Well, it's not a matter of discomfort. It's just I can't really see them as movies. You know, they're almost like documentaries of what I was doing that day, you know? And so maybe eventually I can see a movie that I did 30 years ago, because there are some, and maybe I'd have that distance then, but probably not.
What's your favorite romantic comedy?
My favorite romantic comedy could be, it's probably Frankenstein.
Yeah, that's pretty good, right? In a sense, it really is.
Yes, it is.
Young Frankenstein might be another way to start.
Well, or The Bride of Frankenstein. How about that one?
That's a great film.
Yes.
That's a truly great film. What's the most common mistake that you see young directors making today?
Storyboards.
Not enough or too many?
Well, I think that they rely on them too much. I mean, I think they feel that they should imagine the entire film before they actually even cast it or find the locations, and so they have these storyboards. It's sort of like looking at a comic book version of your movie. And I think that's very restrictive. I think it began with Hitchcock, who said, no, I've got the whole movie in my head, and nobody else is really contributing everything. I've just got it, and I just do it, you know. Yeah. He was lying about that, and I think, but it's taught now that you must do these very precise storyboards storyboard so you know exactly what shot you're going to do when you go on the set. And it's kind of a safety blanket for a young filmmaker, which I can understand. But what it means is you don't have the spontaneity. You can't let your actors really give you some things. I mean, why would you hire a brilliant actor and then tell him, stand over there, say the line exactly like this? You know, you want to see what is he going to bring you. Sure. So I think the storyboards are a problem.
Thanks for coming in, man.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Right on. Film's called A Dangerous Method with David Cronenberg. We'll be right back.
Passionate, well-educated, articulate, incredibly deeply cultured people, but who felt that they were discovering an atomic bomb, really. They were discovering something that was earth-shaking about human nature, about the way the human mind worked. And in fact, Freud was considered quite a dangerous person at the time because it was an era of great stability, the feeling that mankind was progressing from being animal to being angel. You know, there was progress, there was rationality, everything could be worked out by.
The interesting relationship between Sigmund Freud and his pseudo-student Carl Jung.
You realize this makes you undisputed crown prince, don't you?
David Cronenberg.
Good to see you.
The genesis of this story is so interesting to me, the idea of a box of letters that are found, essentially.
Sure. Actually, it was a suitcase, an old leather suitcase that was left in some dank room in the University of Geneva.
What a discovery to kind of go, hey, oh my God, this is Jung and
That's
Freud.
Right, yeah. Very exciting, really.
How did it get to you, the story?
Well, I didn't know anything about it until I read the play by Christopher Hampton, which was called The Talking Cure, and it was about the relationship amongst Sabine Spielrein, this woman whose existence almost wasn't known at all, and Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, who of course were very well known.
The character arcs are endless in a sense, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it was an incredibly rich era, very.
Back in 1975, a young Canadian made his first feature-length movie. It was called Shivers. And while it really scared the hell out of everybody, it was so dark, so perverse, that its artistic merit was even debated in Parliament. It was also the most profitable Canadian film up to that point. So now flash forward 35 years or so, and Cronenberg is still making movies that push boundaries. They explore darkness, and sometimes, yes, they make you squirm. But he didn't always have his heart set on film. He was actually headed toward a life in the sciences, just like his idol Isaac Asimov. But when he won a literary award in his freshman year at University of Toronto, David Cronenberg switched gears entirely. He started telling stories. And while his early films featured things that might repulse you, like violent parasites and exploding heads, nice. They're actually films about ideas. Films that delved deep into the psychology of complex characters.
Tell me the truth. What are you?
Over the years, his films have become, for the most part, less bloody, like his latest. It's called A Dangerous Method, and it explores the turbulent and real